Welcome to the Indigo Podcast, an exploration of human flourishing at work and beyond. I'm Ben Barron of Indigo Anchor and Cleveland State University.
And I'm Chris Everett of Indigo Anchor. For more information, please visit us at www.indigopodcast.com.
Today's episode is all about the 4-day work week. Fad?
Or fabulous?
Yes, indeed. That's the big question of the day.
So how about some housekeeping? So as always, thank you to our listeners. Continue to feel free to contact us via indigotogether.com/contact.
Yeah, last week's episode we devoted just to some listener input. So, send us a note and we'd love to hear from you. Comments, suggestions, ideas, anything like that.
Yeah, throw a rotten tomato digitally. It's all good.
Or a fresh tomato.
Yeah, don't make caprese on our side. So, we only grow from listener referrals. That's really, I think we spent like $12 on Facebook ads once or something. But yeah, you guys are the ones that are the rocket fuel for this ship. So if you could share on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, heck, put it on your OkCupid profile or eHarmony for you commitment-minded folks, right? I guess the Tinder's popular. I don't know how you could get a podcast on Tinder, but
I don't know what any of these things mean.
Yeah, so we've got a whole lot of ideas in the works. So we've got LinkedIn live sessions, Facebook live sessions, YouTube live sessions, meetups, stuff like that. But you got to be on our email list or following us on Facebook or LinkedIn to know about these things.
And the way to get on our email list, just go to indigotogether.com and you'll see right on that page, just scroll down a little bit and there's a form that you can fill out to hop on our email list. Super easy. For our Facebook page, just search The Indigo Podcast on Facebook. Or just if you want to go directly, it's facebook.com/The Indigo Podcast.
Yeah, and I'd gotten off Facebook for a long time, but it was like, I'm back on Facebook for this podcast, so yay Facebook. So, but actually, it's surprising how many people reach out and find us through that means. So, to our Facebook followers, appreciate that. So, I think that's good for housekeeping. So, what are we going to talk about today in this episode?
So today we are going to talk about this whole idea of the 4-day work week. We're going to talk about the history of the 4-day work week and what it is. We're also going to talk about some different types of working schedules. We're going to talk about some of the implications of different industries, some issues of profitability and ethics as it relates to this idea of the 4-day work week. And then we're going to talk about some implications for individuals, for managers, for executives, for board members, to really try to get our heads and our ideas around this whole situation of the 4-day work week.
Yeah, so let's talk about some history here on work week. So who started the dang 40-hour thing anyway?
Well, there's actually kind of a long history on it. And I think what's really cool, and you found some of this, you did a little digging, and is that people have long thought that our work week was just going to keep on getting shorter and shorter and shorter. So, you pointed out that, in 1928, the economist John Maynard Keynes predicted a 15-hour work week within a century. So, here it is, 2020. So I guess in 2028, if Keynes was correct, then we're going to have a 15-hour work week in the next 8 years. Not going to happen. And in 1965, a U.S. Senate subcommittee predicted an even shorter 14-hour work week by 2000.
Oh. Woohoo! A whole extra hour.
Yeah.
Was 7 weeks of vacation, no less.
Yeah. So there's this idea that kind of, I think, as progress continues, as whatever that means, right? As technology advances and so forth, that leisure time was going to increase. And
and I think it could, right? If you want to live in a no air conditioned, no power, dirt floored log cabin on some BLM land.
I mean, that's
You probably could do a 14-hour work week.
You probably could. Or if you found a way to become individually wealthy and then just outsourced a bunch of stuff and just didn't work. Yeah. I mean, it is a really interesting idea that, over time, are we going to experience more and more leisure time? Hasn't really been the case. Even though, we aren't necessarily working for 100 hours a week in the coal mines anymore.
Yeah, we like to quote the famous YouTuber ContraPoints. We like shiny things, and so we now have to work for them.
Right. And so let's just talk through kind of where this started in the 19th century with a brief timeline of this idea of the 40-hour work week. So where did that come from, Chris?
Yeah, so early 1817-ish, right? So people were working like 80 to 100 hour weeks. That's a long time. One of the things that people talk about is like labor saving devices like the vacuum cleaner and the washing machine and stuff like that, helped buy back, because we were just working so many hours, and then you still had to do the amount of hours to cover your subsistence was long, right? But then, we go up to like Ulysses S. Grant, which is like 1870-ish, 1869, I think is the exact date here. He issued a proclamation guaranteeing 8-hour workdays to government employees. And, wow, what a recruitment tool for government workers back then, right?
And that encouraged private sector workers to push for those rights because they're like, hey, like I could go work in the federal government and have an 8-hour work day, so why not get that in the private sector?
Yeah, then maybe some of the spouses of government workers were like, oh my gosh, now this person's home early.
Yeah, now we actually have to talk to each other.
Back in the old days, we just put that jackwagon to work, and then he went to bed. So that takes us all the way up to 1940, where the 40-hour work week becomes U.S. law.
Yeah.
So, basic stuff like if you work over 40 hours, some people are going to get some
And
overtime.
that actually originally started in 1938 with the passing of the Fair Labor Standards Act, also known as FLSA, which had a 44-hour work week in there, and then that went to 40 hours in 1940. And this was a pretty big piece of legislation. I mean, in addition to mandating a shorter work week, it also, had a lot of stuff in there about child labor and other things like that, right? So what's also important to remember, though, is that this idea of mandating the 40-hour work week as a legal requirement, this doesn't apply to everybody. Because there are people who are subject to this law, and there are people who are not subject to this law. So if you are an executive, a person with certain administrative responsibilities, what we consider a creative or learned professional, these are exemptions to that law. So, if you're making more than $100,000 a year, chances are you are not going to be held to this idea of the 40-hour work week. We'll post a link to a really helpful document from the Department of Labor that actually shows what constitutes an exemption from this, because employers can actually get themselves in a lot of trouble if they misclassify people. If they say this person is exempt from this law, so we don't have to pay them overtime if they work more than 40 hours, but it turns out that they really should be paying them, then guess what? They're going to have to pay them all this back pay and all this other kind of stuff. So as an employer, you don't want to misclassify your jobs as being exempt or non-exempt from FLSA.
Yeah, so we'll do a labor fact sheet. SHRM's another good resource for people that need technical information on that. So just want to throw out a warning flag there. But Ben, so we were digging through some stuff on these work schedules and stuff, and in the California Management Review back in 1975, we got a quote out of here.
That's right. So again, this is from 1975. In the California Management Review. This article, and I quote, states, "The 4-day work week has been one of the more widely debated topics in business in recent years. On one hand, it has been heralded as a momentous social innovation that provides the employee with a choice in the matter in which he earns his daily bread. On the other hand, it has been decried as just another management tactic to undermine the advances that have been achieved by labor in the areas of hours of work per day and per week. Most likely, the truth lies somewhere between these extremes. I just think this was great because, 1975, they were saying this has been highly debated and so forth. And, it's now 45 years later, a number of companies are trying this, and they're, it's kind of coming back. The pendulum of these fads kind of comes and goes, and it seems like there's been a recent re-emergence of interest in this idea of the 4-day work week.
Yeah, and hotly debated. I don't know a whole lot of people that sit around debating this heavily because it's so complex.
Yeah, it really is.
So let's talk about some different types of work schedules rather than just chopping off a day with the gig economy and a whole bunch of different stuff. We've got a bunch of different types of work schedules. So Ben, what are some of the work schedules?
Yeah, so one of them is flex time, where people, are permitted and encouraged to work in a more flexible manner, choosing perhaps within some parameters, usually within some parameters, when they're choosing to work. So it could be, different start and stop times of the day, or some other arrangement that an employer makes with employees for when they're going to actually do their work, not adhering necessarily to a strict, show up at 8, leave at 5, or something similar like that for everybody. So that's flex time.
Yeah, I know a lot of software developers that are on that, they code at home type thing.
And then another one is the compressed work week. So what do we mean when we say that?
Well, you're just going to do, you'll still do the hours, right? So if you're a 40-hour person, you may do 4 10-hour days rather than 5 8-hour days.
Exactly. And then we could, another type of work schedule is just the, a variation in terms of the actual total number of hours that a person works for a week. It could be the 30-hour work week or something like that. And then there's...
Yeah, Tim Ferriss likes to talk about the 4-hour work week.
Yes. I don't even think I've done that on vacation ever. It's interesting, right?
There's just this idea of I don't know. You'll get the movie Office Space. You remember that movie, right?
Oh yeah,
yeah. So I'm not gonna work here anymore. Yeah. There was a time earlier in my career when I was working in a cubicle farm, and I couldn't watch that movie because I would just cry because it's just oh my God, my life is so horrible right now.
Hit close to home.
And so when you get to those soul sucking moments that we all have, and hopefully we don't have to live in them for long. Some people do. My heart goes out to those. But, we could be sucked in by this idea of, oh my gosh, wouldn't it be amazing if the work week was only, you're going to get some book
that's what I was going to
say.
There's no question that you'll sell a lot of books with a 4-hour work week. It's kind of like, the 8-minute abs. So it's
I work on my abs for 8 minutes. They're still hidden under the beer,
Right. So, so that's one idea in the flexible work schedule, or different types of work schedules. But it is really interesting also to think about this whole idea of when people are working and where they're working and so forth in an age in which, we are moving much more towards having contingent labor. We're having part-timers. We're having contract labor. We're having people who are part of the gig economy, so to speak.
Yeah, the gig economy.
But it is a thing, right? And that's certainly challenging our traditional notion of you are only working when you are physically present in a certain place for 5 8-hour work days a week, right?
Right. It's all of these different things, you can basically slice and dice the hours you donate to companies in return for cash, right? There's a whole gamut there. So somebody will invent new names for these, but the important thing is there's different types of work schedules. But we got some notable experiments on the 4-day work week. And, I feel like I see these every couple years or so, and it'll get one of those Forbes or Business Insider, ta-da, you cure cancer with Windex and this one easy trick, it's that kind of like, company goes to 4-hour workday and saw 40% jump in productivity. So like one of the most recent example is Microsoft did that in Japan, right? And, they talk about 40% jump in productivity.
Right.
Let's see, Utah, where I live, they adopted 4 10-hour days for their workers. And it was really successful. First they were doing it because the cost of gas and stuff was so high. And they did get a pretty good uptick in productivity. But then they had an audit a few years later, and hey, all those productivity and savings and all that kind of stuff just really wasn't there. So they went back to the 5-day, right? Except for a couple cities and departments, right? Some lucky ones were left or whatever. Another one, this was pretty big. There's just a state planning company in New Zealand. What was Gardner?
Yeah, Perpetual Guardian is the name of the company.
Yeah, Perpetual Gardens.
No, it's Perpetual Guardian.
Right? Okay, cool. So Perpetual Guardian. Anyway, that's the guy, the CEO's this guy named Andrew Barnes, and, he's made some good publicity going around and talking about this and dedicating, being a 4-day week evangelist kind of. Let's see, other notable people, Andrew Yang, he loves this stuff. So if there's any Yang gangers out there, great.
But he's no longer a presidential candidate. As of this recording, he is now a CNN commentator. So,
yeah, good work if you can get it, I guess. But Shake Shack tried it. So, I mean, a lot of people have played with this. But the problem and the reason I get a little bit cynical when I see Business Insider or Forbes talking about this stuff is it's those catchy, not qualified statements. Like, you'll see it's like doctors discover red meat cures cancer. Right. And then like a year later, doctors discover red meat causes cancer. These things are so complex. Right. Cancer doesn't come down to steak.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because you think about it from a scientific perspective, in order to establish actual causality between, variable A and variable B, you need a handful of conditions in place, right? You need for there to actually be some relationship between the two, so what we call covariance between the two variables. There needs to be some time precedence, like thing A needs to happen before thing B for it to cause it. But you also, and this is even more important and probably, I think, even more overlooked by some of the oversimplifications that we see, like, red meat causes cancer or red meat doesn't cause cancer or whatever, or a 4-hour work week, great, 4-hour or 4-day work week, good or bad, is that there are omitted variables, right? And that's what you mean when you were talking about this complexity. There are other things that could be influencing what's going on here that we're not measuring, that we're not talking about. And so the decision, if you're thinking as an executive, should I try this 4-day work week thing, really needs to come down to a number of variables related to your specific industry, your specific situation, because you're not necessarily going to get, the same results as another company that tries it.
Yeah, and I get where people that are evangelists for this kind of stuff, it's the same kind of stuff we see with political organization. Well, you haven't really given capitalism a chance fully because there's these two mitigating factors. Or you haven't really given socialism a chance fully because it was just quasi, Well, you didn't hold on to your 4-day work week long enough. Nobody's established a clear how to run an experiment with this in your organization so that you're 1,000% certain that you're doing the right thing. This is just not one of those black and white cut and dry things.
Yeah. I mean, because theoretically what you would have to do if you wanted to show that with a little bit more of definitive insight is that you would have to, find a group of companies that you randomly select, perhaps, that would be willing to try it, and a group that didn't, and you compare the two, or one company, maybe you randomly select certain locations or employees to go through the 4-day work week, and some others that you wouldn't. And most companies don't have the appetite or the willingness to try that kind of that type of experimentation.
Let's jointly across 5 different competitors do this. And this one had a group of kayakers that likes to get off on Fridays to go kayaking. So they totally skewed the results. How would you have known that there was like 30 kayakers on one team?
Exactly.
Right.
And another big problem with some of these claims around the benefits of the 4-day work week or other related phenomena is that it could be that it's a short-lived benefit, and actually that has been shown to some degree that some of these outcomes that they thought were really positive in the beginning didn't really last. It could be part of what we call in psychology the observer effect, right? So when we pay attention to what people are doing and we give them kind of this novel thing that we're doing to them, that there are some positive outcomes that come from that. But again, these things may not last very long.
Right. It's like you're a diligent student when the teacher's sitting in the class, but when they go out to the hallway, you like to hit Timmy with a spitball.
Well, of course.
You're not. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gosh darn you, Timmy. Cool. So let's talk about kind of how industry profitability and ethics kind of go into exploring this topic.
Yeah. It's interesting thinking about different industries and how you might actually be able to try something like this, because we're not necessarily saying that the 4-day work week is a horrible idea. We're saying that it's a tricky thing to measure, and that you should exercise some caution and some thoughtfulness if you're going to decide to do this. But if you are, for example, in a retail environment, you've got to have somebody there who's just providing that coverage, in order to turn the lights on, open the store, be there in case somebody walks in. You can't just necessarily, shut down the place for 1 day a week. You've got to be thoughtful about it. So industry definitely matters.
Yeah. If you need to go get a marriage license on a Friday because you're in Vegas, somebody's got to be there to give you one. Right. So, now let's talk about like shareholder value and profitability metrics. Now, earlier parts of kind of the business literature and thinking about business, we talk about how companies exist to maximize shareholder value, right? Which generally has some kind of profitability metric. Is that, earnings per share or, whatever that's going to be. But part of that is you have this whole gamut of employees there that also want to participate in that system. So if you're able to drive all of the, if you're able to continue to get your labor at the lowest cost, eventually there's a curve to that where you start getting diminishing returns. That's going to impact who and the types of people you can recruit, right? It's going to, impact your kind of brand out in the workplace, right? So I don't know anything about the inner workings of Amazon. Like I've never been to a fulfillment center or something like that. And so they may actually have the most ethical way of managing their employees ever. I don't know.
But public perception is, at least among some people, is that they don't. Yeah,
it's garbage. It's the I mean, and I don't know anybody that's canceled their, Prime membership over it. So maybe that says something about us as a people, but
I still like my fast things in the mail. Absolutely.
But these are things that weigh into a broader social conversation that we're having on what kind of workforce, since our podcast is dedicated to people flourishing at work and beyond, looking only at one metric of how much can I get for as little as possible, I can't say that's the best way to go about thinking about this stuff. However, if you make, I don't know, something that's a commodity that could be made overseas as well, like something like copper wire, there's only so much extra you can charge for that because of proximity. So we get copper wire orders, and I'm just using this as a random example. We get copper wire orders because we can deliver them next day. Whereas if they ordered 1,000,000 miles of copper wire from an overseas entity, it may take us 6 to 8 weeks to get it, right? But there's only so much extra you can charge for that convenience thing. And so workers in that kind of industry, because of profitability and going concern issues, like they're kind of in a crucible, right?
Right. And I think that's where, management has to think long and hard about what kind of employer brand they're going to have, right? So even though a highly competitive environment, razor thin margins, if you're working everybody to death and you're making this, it's just a horrible place to work, that reputation is going to get out there. And it's going to be hard to keep those people. And you also just got to think about whether or not that's the right thing to do or not, how you treat your folks.
Yeah, so I was doing some workforce strategy for this large organization, and I was watching to where, and this is really typical, and as somebody that likes free, as much as possible having free market stuff happen, right? Not that it can be fully unconstrained, but one of the things that employers do is they ask you how much you made at your last job.
Sure.
Right. And so, what if you took a job at, the mall so you could study computer programming, then you delivered like awesome projects for a nonprofit to validate your skills, and then you go to apply, and they, because this is what I've seen in a lot of companies, right? Okay, so you made 60,000. Great. Even though this job role pays 80 to 95, depending on experience, we're just going to offer them, they made 60,000. We'll offer them 68. Right. And of course, the better people will like immediately figure out somebody that'll pay them a market wage. But there's this idea and this philosophy. And I think this is why a lot of workers have a kind of a stink eye about some organizations is these organizations literally are treating them like chattel. What's the littlest I can get you for? And that's not the kind of collaborative alliance that I think is actually most beneficial for building winning company cultures.
Sure. Another thing that we discussed when we were trying to think about this episode and this idea of the 4-day work week is that, people get used to things.
Hedonic adaptation.
Right. We get used to those things that we enjoy in our lives, and then once they get taken away, we really get irate. So you think about the fact that maybe there's some sort of convenience you have in your life. Maybe it's something about your car or some technology. And you probably really loved it when you first got it, and that joy and elation probably subsided a little bit over time. But if I took that away from you, you'd probably be very upset. I think that's an important thing to think about for any organization that's going to try something like a 4-day work week or anything related to kind of how they treat their people, or some of these outrageous perks and benefits that you hear about at some organizations. Particularly in the tech industry, is what would happen if we have to take this away? And that could really cause some problems for people's morale and so forth.
Yeah, and another way of thinking about hedonic adaptation is, I've seen that somebody steps up from a manager to a director role, or something happens and they have a windfall of a much bigger salary than they've ever had before. Right, so they go from making 60 to 120 or something like that, and so they're double. Immediately, it's like, yes, everything feels awesome, nothing but blue skies, that kind of thing. And then 6 to 8 months later, they got the bigger house, they got a car payment that's probably stupid, they got the country club membership. We would be scandalized if I was in college and looked at how much my cell phone bill is. I'd have been like, what? You're paying north of $100 for a cell phone? Right? And so, like, we adapt to these things. Like, we didn't have pocket supercomputers, right? In the 90s. And that costs some of our wealth and our time. So the overall trend, despite what you may hear bandied about by certain people, is worker hours are down we are not working 80 to 100 hours. Do I think that's awesome? Yes. People can reinvent themselves. People have time to learn stuff. Leisure begets creativity.
For
there's
some
a
people.
lot of good stuff on that. Yeah, I mean, if you're crushing candy with your free time, oh man. But in aggregate, if you give a group of people some free time, you're going to have more creativity coming out. Maybe it only comes out of 5 people, but you get it out of the 5 people you wouldn't have otherwise. And also, median wages are up. But we adapt to those kinds of things. So, when we look at the idea of like flex time schedules and all that stuff, the productivity jump generally happens right away. And like you said, that could be observer effect. Sometimes it's just having something that breaks up the monotony, right? But just because that those benefits diminish over time doesn't mean there aren't existential and cultural benefits. And so you need to be thinking about, what those look like.
Yeah, pretty universally. I mean, people, when they're given more freedom, in terms of either having a 4-day work week or having some flex time, the ability to choose when they work and so forth, that does usually increase job satisfaction, especially initially. And like you said, there are some probably bigger benefits here in terms of people being able to do other things with their time. And, the whole idea here, I think, is really important to point out is, the idea is that, there's certain things that you have to get done as an organization. If people are getting them done, and there's nothing else for them to do necessarily at that moment, why are they still there? Send them home, you know?
Or actually train them. I mean, we have no time for training. Well, there you go, right?
There are so many small moments and big moments of non-productivity in everybody's workday. Like, I'm sorry, especially in the modern workplace for knowledge workers, you can stare at your computer screen and act like you're working pretty darn easily. And or these little moments where you're not actually being productive. And if you can be productive more during specific times, and then during those times after you've gotten the work done, if you have more of a results-based mentality about this, then the reward should be that, hey, you get to work on something else that's cool, or you get to perhaps not work that anymore.
Yeah, versus when I worked in a call center, straight out of college type thing, for Dell computers actually. Man, you have this button you can press on your phone called aux, which means calls from the queue will come to you, right? And if your aux time was too high, I mean, you're going to get hammered, right? But as you're just like call after call after call, the aux button calls to you.
I can imagine.
Now that's AUX, not OX, but there are roles where, and this is something that really kind of, there's a disconnect. So I do a lot with tech companies and executives and stuff. A lot of them have never had to work in a environment where every moment of bathroom breaks at these call centers are monitored, right? And when you're in a grind, I'd love to sit in a stall and just cry a little bit. Sometimes if it's a rough day, I broke up with my girlfriend and I still have to answer calls in a way that's just monitored. And that creates a different type of culture and stuff that some people can do well in, some people can't. And I think, there's a disconnect, and, knowledge workers, they have a certain perspective, and just, I don't know, what do we call them? Workers, have a different quality of life around hours and workplace. But the data on this, we can't prove that long hours are horrible for your health and well-being.
Not necessarily. Again, this is a very hard thing to measure. And, what's probably most important is to take into account the work context. Do you have a work environment that's safe, that is relatively enjoyable? That's very important for long-term stress, for long-term satisfaction, and so forth, as well as commitment to the organization, as well as the work itself. So if the work itself is absolutely monotonous and boring and soul-sucking, that probably will have an effect on your own well-being and perhaps your health over time. But just sheer work hours alone, because some people love their work. I like my work. I work way more than 40 hours a week. And that's okay because
and it's awesome.
I like what I do.
Yeah.
So I think it's very important. Again, don't get caught up if you're thinking about should we do this 4-day work week thing or some other management fad. Don't just look at it worked in this company or there's it's much more complex than that. And I think what's even more important is to come back to what's the work context. Is it one that is helping people be productive and helping them flourish? Is the work itself designed in a way that's giving people variety and meaning and autonomy or not? So those are important things to consider from a management perspective.
Cool. So let's move to talking about implications for individuals, managers, execs, and board members, right? So implications for individuals.
Sure. So when we're thinking about these ideas of flexible work schedules, when we're thinking about this idea of the 4-day work week, this has an impact on people based upon their life situation, right? So we see some impacts, for example, on gender pay disparity, that it becomes less when you have more availability for flex time and so forth, perhaps because in most situations, women tend to have more of the domestic responsibilities at home if they have a family.
Guys, anytime you want to pick up the slack.
Yep. No, I mean,
like, how did my wife say? It's like, hey, dude, anytime you want to chip in more, I'm not going to stone you.
Exactly. I mean, I think just on a side note, if you are in a committed relationship and have a family and so forth, be a good teammate because that'll make life better and career stuff better for both of you. It's funny. It wasn't funny, but I was sick for the past 2 weeks in various ways. And my wife said to me this morning, she said, "I'm so glad you're better. It was really terrible having to do the dishes all the time." Because that's kind of my little thing. I do the dishes.
Yeah, because you won't let anybody else load the dishes, Ben. It has to be your way or it's wrong. Let me tell the listeners this. So
this is so true.
Whenever I'm in the Cleveland area, I just stay at Ben's house. And it's his family is amazing. Like, his kids are so awesome that it's like embarrassing to me as a parent, honestly. But when I'm there, because I travel a lot, so it's nice to be with a family sometimes. And so I'm like, hey, I'm going to throw in and do the dishes like at home, type thing. And what are you doing? Hey, you're loading it all wrong.
Well, and I'm laughing too. I'm laughing too because I did that to my mom last weekend. She was loading the dishwasher, and I said, "Well, those cups, they go best in this one little spot." Of course, it was just like, I was like, she's trying to help and I'm being a jerk. But yeah.
And obviously, as weird as I am, I'll never have a normal business partner. So I just accept it.
You got what you got. So these domestic responsibilities are part of this. And flex time, maybe having compressed work week, can be good for people who have other stuff going on in their lives.
Elder care. That's a great one.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that one up because, we have people who are living longer. We have more people who are, especially not only now, but in the future, we're going to have a lot of people who are needing to spend time, a lot of people who are working, who need to spend time in some way or another taking care of their parents or some other elder relative or something like that. And, if you can have some flexibility in the working schedule, those people are going to really benefit from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then like the employee life cycle. So I've seen this with like some of the startups that have younger entrepreneur founders and they hire a bunch of, people their own age and they're able to hard charge because they're either dual income, no kids, right? Or, all they've got is work. They're fresh out of college. They're hungry for knowledge and experience. Maybe they're experiencing growth in that segment or industry. And so it's all hands on deck. But eventually they grow and they hire somebody. They hire their first middle-aged person. And he's like, yeah, I'd like to get off early on Wednesday because my kid's got a soccer game. And I remember watching these guys. They're like, Do what? You know? But that's not, let me just tell you, if you think that's the world we should live in, where your life is nothing but grinding it out, like it can be so fulfilling, especially if you're taking market share, landing big deals. Like that's awesome, but you're missing out on other parts of life. And that doesn't mean you don't have to go with the normal script of get married and have 2.5 kids, but you're missing stuff like volunteering as a big brother or big sister. Sitting on the board of a nonprofit that has a great social mission in your community. All of these kinds of things. You got to have that broader perspective. And it's so easy to get lost, right? Especially if you're, an individual that, I just need to prove my worth, prove my worth. It's easy to lose that stuff. But hey, guess what? You got a partner, right? You got elder care issues, possibly. You may decide to start a family or adopt, and your employee life cycles, the amount of hours and how hard you can hit it, it's a little bit different in your 70s than it is in your 20s.
Well, and I would say it's particularly different in your 20s than it is maybe in your mid 30s, 40s, if you have kids at kind of typical times, like just having 4 of them myself, and you have 2 kids, and it's like there's a lot going on, and depending on your level of health and interest, you might be at the age of 70 more productive than when you're 40, or at least more available mentally and perhaps physically, depending on what's going on at home. So
having some flexibility helps all of these scenarios.
It does. And so I think, whereas we kind of came down on the, it's a little bit of a faddish thing earlier, there are some different aspects of these ideas of the 4-day work week or other types of flexibility in work schedules that really are fabulous. I think another really good point here to remember is that, many employers have employees who, are also staying connected to their work. They are available through technology, answering emails, etc., at home, after work hours, and so forth. And so it's like, are they actually working a 40-hour week right now anyway? Right?
Yeah. Thanks for the 32-hour reduced schedule, and you're still paying me the same, but now I'm available at weird times.
Yeah.
Yeah, and does anybody even work 40 hours anymore? I
think there are a number of, well, if you are subject to the Fair Labor Standards Act, right? If you're in a role where that is the law, then most employers are probably paying fairly close attention to how much you're working, because then they need to pay you overtime if you go beyond that. But I would say, in more, knowledge work types of situations, in professional environments, executives for sure, it's very hard to even what does it mean to be working even? You think about my job, take my professor job. One of my jobs is to write and to develop ideas and publish research and so forth. Well, sometimes I think about these things and have good ideas when I'm like on a hike. And so I'm kind of working while I'm hiking around, but you wouldn't know it. So it's very hard to measure whether or not people are actually working sometimes. And we have this connectivity that we never used to at other points in history.
Right. And people have side hustles, right? And one of the things with the gig economy is, they don't have to pay for times you're not active, right? So, like, if you're a delivery person, you get paid by the delivery. Well, you may be sitting around for 3 hours that you're not getting paid for, waiting for delivery. But you can't be 100% present. And so even for those that, people are monitoring overtime and don't want to cut overtime overly much, which we see a lot of manufacturers get in the habit. Oh, well, we had tons of overtime. Everybody pluses up their lifestyle to that overtime paycheck. And then somebody comes in, VC firm buys it, cuts all the overtime out, and then you got a labor riot on your hands because everybody was used to and needs that money just to make rent, right? But even the people that only work for 40 hours, everybody kind of's got a hot side hustle. Or I can't say everybody, but I know a lot of people with side hustles.
Yeah, I would say it's becoming increasingly common, right? So, another thing that I think we need to talk about, some, another implication for people here. if you are in a flexible work environment with regard to working hours, be it a compressed work week or flex time or some other arrangement, is that you've got to do a little extra impression management if you have a weird schedule.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So used to deal with this when talking to execs on, they're going to take, there was a time when everybody went to India if you were like an IT executive. So you need to know how to like spin up software teams, all that kind of stuff over there. But one of the things that we would coach on is, how are you going to manage? How do you make sure you don't get marooned in India? Like, oh, wait, Phil. Yeah, that's right. He's still in India. Where's Phil? Well, he's been in India for 2 years, like just grinding away. Like, guys, I've been requesting to come back to the home office.
Or just, it could just be an out of sight, out of mind thing where the person who is, either working in a disparate location or working from home or working a different schedule just gets forgotten about with regard to things like their performance. It's if you aren't around, if you aren't physically, there, sometimes it can be easy for other people to forget you. So you as an individual contributor or whatever in that situation, as a person with a different schedule, you need to be proactive. And I think remind people of your existence, be it via, strategically sending emails, chiming in on things, requesting and having other types of maybe calls or video chats and stuff like that, just to really be present, so that people don't forget about you. It's unfortunate, but it is.
Yeah, impression management has to be deliberate. Yeah. So because it's easy to be like, well, what's Ben doing all day other than sitting around in his pajamas?
That is what I do.
Yeah, playing crosswords or something, Sudoku, right? Which. Sorry for you Sudoku addicts. I never got into it anyway, but so the manager hands out the work and then the work comes in. But, managers, your manager, depending on the organization, will say like, well, what does your staff do all day? Or because a lot of managers don't know how to manage remote work and that kind of stuff. And so those things like, oh, we need to do cuts. Well, Jimmy hasn't been in the office, so.
Poor Jimmy. Yeah, just because that person had a different type of schedule, right?
Right. And then Jimmy gets axed. And, so one of the things you want to do is just say, great, awesome, glad to be working at home. What's our meeting schedule? Awesome. What kind of reports can I send to you? Now, if they said, just turn in your work, I would still check in with a once or twice a week. Here's what I got done this week. Here's what's coming up for me this next week. These are things I need help, like a scrum meeting. What I did this week, what I'm doing next week, and these are the things that are in my way. Also, it's not just your manager you need to be managing. You need to let the person to your left and right, your teammates, right, know what you're doing. So they don't get to sit there and guess.
I think those are some excellent points. So if you are in that situation, be proactive, manage your impressions, and so forth. Another interesting piece of research we came across, and we're going to post a link to a number of different citations and articles and so forth on these topics. But too much flexibility might actually be counterproductive, right? If you have too much say over all of these different things related to your work schedules, and if you give everybody just kind of free reign over it, it could create chaos within the work environment. And so as an organization, you need to be careful about how you roll something like this out. I think we can move now maybe to some implications of different work schedules, 4-day work week types of issues for managers.
Right. So I just want to say straight out the bat, managers, there's not like a easy Mac way to do this. You add your water, pop it in the microwave, it's done. If you're going to play with these kinds of things, right, you've got skill sets you got to pick up on how to manage complex work schedules, remote workers, those kinds of items. You also need to make sure that what you're doing with your team nests favorably with the handoffs and other teams and up and down effects that you have to sync with.
Very true. And you're going to just also be dealing with another level of complexity for yourself if everybody has differing schedules. Now, the benefits may be there for people in terms of their job satisfaction, in terms of their life and so forth. But you will be having some more complexity for yourself. That's not a reason to not consider alternative work schedules, 4-day work week types of ideas, but you are going to have some more complexity there.
Right. And if somebody, you're like, hey, you're going to work from home if you want. Yeah, I want to work from home. And they aren't, with the gusto coming to you. Awesome. Here's my meeting schedule plan. Here's my reporting plan. You need to build that structure for the different types of work arrangements that you have on your team. And also making sure that it's not you that just knows, but ensure that cross-team communication is happening. The same thing that we talk about for the individual. If your manager doesn't do it, you do it. Well, if you're the manager, you need to make sure that your team is doing that. So if you have to speak to the output and the productivity of your team, or even justify further headcount, having that kind of stuff is going to be, requisite for you to move forward in those areas.
That's right. So if we move up a level, we've talked about some implications here for individuals. We've talked about implications for managers. What about some implications for executives, for board members?
Oh man, I mean, this is where the rubber meets. I mean, lots of times everybody's important, right? But the people that can really shape this stuff are both the board of directors and the C-suite, or very senior executives, right? Division heads, that kind of stuff. This is where you set the culture.
Yeah. And what I always think about is, what kind of message are you sending to your people as a senior leader if you are emailing them at 11 p.m., if you are, doing things that are obviously showing that you're always on. You are very, I would say not just implicitly, but kind of explicitly in a way, setting this expectation that you're always on, that you're always at work and so forth. And now I've known people who have deliberately said, well, I'm going to make sure I respond to that email at 3 a.m. just to show people how dedicated I am. And I mean,
oh my God.
The sad thing is it probably works a little bit, right?
Yeah, Steve's such a hard charger. Look at his early morning.
Just set all of your emails to auto send at weird times of the day,
Yeah. No, listen, I know people that do that, and it's
yeah,
so
yeah.
stupid.
But the reason they do it is it probably, to some degree is part of that culture where if you demonstrate that you're always, getting after it, that you're somehow rewarded for that. So just remember, if you're an executive, if you're a board member, that your attitude and your approach towards the working hours really matters, and it will trickle down. So that I've heard,
and that could be totally good. You may want a culture that people reply at the middle of the night. You right? may. It's just a decision you're making.
Right
there.
Now, I've also heard of executives who have consciously made the decision and put out to their people that, look, I am not going to respond to emails between 5 and 9 p.m. because I'm dealing with my kids at that point. Or something like that. And that, in turn, can also send a positive message throughout the organization that, hey, it's okay for you to be off at some time.
Right. And, a lot of this is just big implications for company strategy and HR strategy. When you decide what kind of company you want to be, right? And what type of people you would like to recruit and retain there. Top software developer talent will seldom work in a poorly managed sweatshop, right? Because they have options. And when people have options, right? And that's kind of what you want a lot of your employees to be. People that could work somewhere else, but choose to work where you're at. Same thing. Do we want to take the brand hit on just trying to drive salaries as low as possible, right? Versus, hey, we know you made $60,000 in your last role, but we believe you can do this job. We want to hire you. This role plays 90 to 100. We're going to pay you 92.
Right.
That sends a signal into the marketplace. Glassdoor.com. People write. I mean, you can tell when they're like just a disgruntled employee, but you can also tell when somebody's like, this culture just wasn't for me because of the following. Those cultural signals are out there for potential workers. And also HR strategy, how they conduct interviews and that kind of stuff. If you don't want to have a lot of turnover, just be like, listen, we're going to be frank. This is a sweatshop for the first 3 years. But if you can survive those first 3 years, these things open up to you. Yeah. Okay. You can bake that in.
Well, and actually being realistic about what the work environment is like. both the good and the bad is a very important HR practice. When you talk about recruiting, when you talk about hiring and onboarding. Excellent. I think another good point that needs to be made here at the senior level with regard to different work schedules is that you've also got to sell this to your external stakeholders. You've got to, if necessary, explain this to your clients, to your customers. You've got to be able to defend why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah, when the earnings report, you meet with the analyst or whatever going to grill you. Hey, you brought in this work schedule and shares are down X, You can still sell your way past that lots of times, This is the type of company we're going to be. These kinds of elements need to be brought in there. And, it's an ethical thing. Do your employees deserve to have time with their family, right? If they're going to work on Christmas, are they going to get a day near Christmas off or something, if that's culturally important to you? You just got to think about those ethical items of work and work-life balance. And, this used to be in business books. I haven't seen this in a while. It's probably there because I'm not in some of these like undergrad texts anymore. But when, at least in the US, when we allow you to incorporate, we say we want you to take risks to build something awesome that builds well for our countries, that builds well for you and your stakeholders, and builds well for your employees so they can participate. If you fail in that, we don't come and take the shirt off your back and kick your family to the curb and take your house, right? That's not how that. But there's an ethical component. Because we deputize you to be able to take that kind of risk and move forward, you owe something back to the broader community that you serve, be that sponsoring the Little League baseball team. But one place you can really do it is make sure that you are comfortable and dialed into the ethical implications of the work schedules and the work-life balance of your employees.
That's well said. And I think it's an important consideration for any leader of any organization. And it goes into this whole idea of, how do you want to be remembered? What kind of leader, what kind of person do you want to be? And how does that translate into your decisions for your organization?
Yeah, Scrooge McDuck is not the way forward. At least that's my advice.
Great. So today we talked about this whole idea. We centered on this idea of the 4-day work week. And where did we come down on it? Fad or fabulous?
It's both.
It depends.
It depends.
Yes, that's right. I think we talked about some reasons why it depends: the work context, the industry, and how you manage it. We talked about the history of this whole idea of the 4-day work week. It is not something that is, new, actually. People have been debating this for a long time. We talked about different types of work schedules. We talked about issues of the industry variance, profitability and ethics. And then we wrapped up here with some implications for individuals, for managers, for execs and board members. Thanks for listening to the Indigo Podcast. If you like this podcast, please consider helping us by rating us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen, telling your friends about us, having us on your podcast, or mentioning us on social media. Our website is www.indigopodcast.com, where you can access more information about us and this episode. Thanks again, and we look forward to talking with you again soon.